We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Beis and Beis Mesechet Kesuvos. This is Kesuvos Daf 102b. And the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing the Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish in terms of a person that writes down that he's obligated to another person a money, but he doesn't sign it, he just writes down this obligation. So the question is he obligated or not? Rabbi Yochanan said he is obligated, Reish Lakish said he is not obligated. And the Gemara in the previous Amud brought a brisa in which Rabbi Yishmael seemed to indicate by an arev, by a guarantor. Let's say he writes that he's guaranteeing a loan and he writes it below the signature, so then he is going to be chayiv. And so the Gemara now says, Ki pligi alibid Rabbi Yishmael, the machlokas and Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish will be within the sheet of Rabbi Yishmael. Meaning to say, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yochanan obviously can follow Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says that the arev is chayiv when he says that he's going to be an arev, and again he writes that below the signatures on the shtar. And so to Rabbi Yochanan, when the person writes down that he's chayiv amana, the person is going to be chayiv. Reish Lakish can say within Rabbi Yishmael that even Rabbi Yishmael agrees with him as well. Ad kan lo kam Rabbi Yishmael hasam ela d'shayich leila shibud dorais. Rabbi Yishmael said the arev is chayiv because, as we said on the previous summit, that's related to a chiyuv from the Torah. The Torah has the concept of an arev. Aval hacha, but over here when we're talking about the person obligating himself, as Rashi says, aval hacha ploni chayiv leka shibud doraisa. There's no shibud doraisa when the person just obligates himself. That's not sourced in the Torah. Lo shayich shibud doraisa. There's no shibud doraisa, so it could be Rabbi Yishmael would agree with what Reish Lakish is saying in a standard case when we're not talking about an arev. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we quoted above. This was on the previous Amud. Amar Rav Gidel Amar Rav. Rav Gidel said that Rav said, Kama tanosin levincha kach v'kach. They're arranging a marriage between the son and between a person's son and the other person's daughter. And so he says, how much are you going to give to your son to bring into the marriage? Such and such an amount of money. V'kama tanosin lebitchan. How much will you give to your daughter that she'll bring into the marriage? Kach v'kach. Such and such amount of money. Amdu v'kidshu, so then they have the kiddushin, they get married. Kanu, that is going to be a kinyan. Hein hadvarim haniknim ba'amir. And we said in the previous Amud, that is an example of something which just through amira bi'alma, just through really verbal commitment, that's going to be a kinyan. And the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, Mistabra milsa de Rav. It makes sense that what Rav is saying over here, Bebito Nara. We're talking about a situation where his daughter that he's marrying off is a Nara. The Kamati Hanali Yade, because in such a situation, the father is actually the one getting the benefit. Rashi says he's the one that receives the Kesef Kedushin. When a father marries off his daughter who is a Nara, and again, a Nara is a woman who has reached the beginning of adulthood, but it's just for that first 6 months. She's not yet a Bogeres, she's not yet a full adult. So there, the father actually receives the Kesef Kiddushin. So then it makes sense that in that situation where he receives the Kesef Kiddushin, he obligates himself in this certain amount of money he will commit towards the marriage. Avol Bogeres, but when it comes to a girl who's a full adult, Delomati Hanoli Yadi, where the father's not receiving any benefit in the marriage, lo, so then Rav would not have said this halacha. But the Gemara says, V'elokim amar Rav afilu bogeres. What are you talking about? Rav did say it even by a bogeres. It's not only by a nara. And not only that, it has to be that way. To ilo teimahachi, because if you don't say that, avi haben. This statement of Rav wasn't only talking about commitments from the father of the girl that's getting married. It's also commitments from the father of the boy of his son who's getting married. My hanos aliyadeh. And by the son, what benefit is the father of the son getting in the marriage? He doesn't receive any type of kesef kiddushin. Ela b'ahi anod the kamichsani adadi. Rather, it's because everyone's benefiting here because they like the fact that there's a marriage that's happening. So gamri umachni lahadadi. So they make this kinyan and they have a full intention for the kinyan to one another, and the kinyan works regardless of where the kesef kiddushin is going. That's how the kinyan works. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Ravina le Ravashi. Ravina said to Ravashi, Dvorim halolu nitnu lichasev, o lo nitnu lichasev. These kinds of verbal commitments, is it something that is able to be written down, or is it not able to be written down? Rashi over here says, Nitnu lichasev, nasnu chachamim ksivo ledovar, imbo lahachsim edim bidvarim halalu shein below kinyan. The Gemara means to ask, let's say they make some type of a commitment and some type of an obligation without a kinyan. So can you sign edim on such a commitment or not when you didn't make a kinyan? Maybe lo nitnu lichasev, the lo litraf mi meshavdi. Maybe we don't want that you should be able to collect from the chasim mishubadim. If you write it down in a document and you sign edim, you can collect from the chasim mishubadim. V'kevan de like a kinyan lo mishtabdi nichse. Maybe if you're doing these kind of commitments and obligations where there's no kinyan, maybe you shouldn't collect from the chasim mishubadim. That's Ravina's question. Is it something that can be written down or not? Amar Le responded to him, Lo nitnu lichasev. The halach is it's not meant to be written down. That was the Rashi we really read before. That was the response of Rav Ashi to Ravina. This should not be written down. You should not collect from the chasim mishubadim. Esvei, we have a question from our Mishnah. The Mishnah said, again, this was talking about the person who's obligating himself to support his stepdaughter, and it said at the end of the Mishnah, Hapichin hayukosvin al minas she'ezon ez bitcha chamesh shanim. It says the smart father-in-laws or the smart stepfathers would write down a condition that I'll support your daughter, meaning he's going to support his stepdaughter for 5 years, kol zman shat imi, but only as long as we're married. But if our marriage dissolves, so then I'm not going to support your stepdaughter. Now here it says very clearly, kosvin, that they write it down, and again we said this obligation in the Mishnah is a similar kind of obligation that is without a kinyan. So therefore, by this obligation as well, it sounds like we do write it down. It sounds like nitnu li chasev. And the Gemara answers, my kosvin omrim. The Gemara answers that no, when it says kosvin in the Mishnah, it's lav dafka. It really just means they say that. They say that they're going to support for that amount of time while they're still married, but they don't actually write anything down. V'kari leila amira ksiva. The Gemara says, is this really true? Do we call amira ksiva? Do we really call a statement, a verbal statement, writing down? The Gemara says, in yes. V'atnan, we learned in the Mishnah, for example, hakosev leishto dinu dvarim einli b'nechasayich. Let's say a person writes to his wife that I have no claim against your property. V'tani Reb Chia ha'omer leishto. Reb Chia taught that it doesn't really mean kosev, it really means omer. He just says to his wife this. So you see that sometimes the word kosev is used when we're just talking about amira. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, another proof, in Kosvin, Shtari, Erisin, V'nisuin, we don't write documents of Erisin, betrothal, and Nisuin, marriage, Elamidas Shneim, unless both parties agree. Unless both parties understand what we're writing, and they agree to the commitments. So Hamidash Shneim, Kosvin, so it sounds like if they both agree, if it is with their will, so then we would write it down. My lab, and aren't we talking about Shtari Psikta? Exactly these shtaros that we were mentioning before. These kind of documents really are verbal commitments, and we are writing something down. And the Gemara says, lo, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about these various commitments of the marriage, each one, what kind of money he's going to commit to the marriage. Rather, Shtare, Eris, and Mamish. We're talking here about real documents of betrothal, meaning the actual document that's used for the purpose of creating the kinyan, of creating the marriage. Rav Papa for Rav Sharvia, it's like what Rav Papa Rav Sharvia said, the Yitmar, because it was learned the following machlokas amoroim, Kasvu l'shma v'shalom idaita, when they write down the shtar erisin, so if it's done for her, but it wasn't done with her knowledge, meaning even the writing of the document wasn't done with her knowledge, so Rabba v'Ravina Amri Mekudeshes, Rabba and Ravina say that's fine. As long as the Kiddushin is with her knowledge, you don't have to actually write down the document with her knowledge. Rav Papa v'Rav Sharvia Amri Eina Mekudeshes. Rav Papa and Rav Sharvia, they say no, it's not a good Kiddushin, you have to actually write the shtar erisin, and again we're talking about shtari erisin mamish, you have to write that down with the knowledge of the woman. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, another proof. It said in our Mishnah, Mesu benosein nizonos minachasim b'neichorin, v'hi nizones minachasim mishubadim. It said, let's say that these fathers, these stepfathers die, so their own daughters, they're going to be supported from the chasim b'neichorin, from free property. That's a general stipulation of the ksuba, that the daughters are supported from the property of the estate. But she, meaning the stepdaughter who has a special contract that was written for her, or a special stipulation was made for her, that he's going to support his stepdaughter, she can even collect from the chasim mishubadim, mipnei shi kabalas cho, because she's like a creditor. Now over here it sounds like clearly she's collecting from the chasim mishubadim. It sounds like they wrote down the obligation. It sounds like ninu li chasev, that she's a real creditor, that it's written down and she can get from the chasim mishubadim. So the Gemara answers, Hachab Mayaskin, and you have to say here in this case, what is it talking about? B'shekanu miyadu, there actually was a kinyan. Our whole question was in a situation where they didn't actually make a kinyan, so then there was a question, you write it down, can you collect from the chasim mishubadim? But here you have to say, we're talking about where there was a kinyan. Gemara says, Ihachi, if so, banos nami b'shekanu. The banos nami, rather. If that's the case, so the person's actual daughters also, they made a kinyan. So why are we making a distinction? And we're saying that in the case of the stepdaughter, she collects from the chasim mishubadim, and not in the case of the other daughters. And the Gemara answers, b'shekanu lezu v'lo kanu lezu. No, the case of the Mishnah happens to be they made a kinyan for the stepdaughter, they didn't make a kinyan for the other daughters. The Gemara says, umay piska, but why should you make such a distinction that you say there's a kinyan for this one, not for that one? And the Gemara answers, ihi dahavoy b'shas kinyan. So she, meaning the stepdaughter, she was around at the time of the kinyan, meaning she was born already. He's getting married to a woman who already had a daughter. She was already born, and now at the time he's marrying this wife who has the stepdaughter of his, so they're making this kinyan, she's around, and therefore, mahani la kinyan. So if you make a kinyan, it's going to be effective. But his other daughters, they're going to be born in the future after the marriage. So the lo hava b'shas kinyan, they're not around at the time of the kinyan, lo mahani lahu kinyan. So the kinyan doesn't help for them, and that's why there's a distinction between these different kind of daughters. But the Gemara says, what do you mean? Milo askinan dehavoy b'shas. Can't we come up with a case where these other daughters are around at the time of the kinyan? Vehechi dami, how would be such a case? Kagon de gorsha v'hadra. Let's say he married a woman, had children with her, divorced her, remarried her. Now at the remarriage, those children are around. You could have a case where they're alive at the time of the kinyan. And so the Gemara answers instead, Ella rather, Ihi delesa b'tnai bezin, she, so that obligation is a separate obligation. A person, according to the courts, doesn't have to separate their stepdaughter. He's taking that special upon himself. Mahani lo kinyan, so the kinyan is effective for the stepdaughter. But bonos diisnu b'tnai bezin, when it comes to the other daughters, they're already getting something based on the condition of the court, lo mahani lo kinyan. So he makes a kinyan for them, it's not going to be effective. The Gemara says, Migra Gari, are they worse off because the court guarantees them, has a stipulation that they're guaranteed mizonos? That shouldn't make it worse. That should be better. The fact that there's a Tanai Bezin on his regular daughter should mean a kinyan should be more effective. So the Gemara instead says, Ela Benos, rather the reason is as follows. By his daughters, Hainu Taima, here's the reason. Kevon Disnu with Tanai Bezin, since there is a condition of Bezin that they're to receive this property, Amor Tsrariat Fesinu, there's always the possibility that we can say that he already set aside the money. He put some movable objects set aside, designated. And so now they're going to go try to collect from the Chasim Mishubadim. The claim can always be, what do you mean you're taking from the Chasim Mishubadim? The purchasers can say, why are you taking my property? This was a Tanai Bezin, there's probably something set aside already for you, so therefore we don't allow the collection from the Chasim Mishubadim by the regular daughters. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Lo Yomar Harishon, the Mishnah said, let's say you have a situation where this woman, she married a person, and again, that person, that man, agreed to support a stepdaughter. Then she left that husband, and she married a different person. He also agreed to support. So the halacha was that first person still has to send the mizonos. He can't say, I'm only going to give mizonos to my stepdaughter while she's with me, but now that she's moved on somewhere else, I'm not going to send the mizonos. He still has to send the mizonos. Amar Rav Chisda says, Zos Omeres, this proves, Bas Eitzel Imo. It shows that the daughter really stays with her mother. That's why she follows along with her mother, and he's got to support her where she is. And the Gemara says, one second, but how do you know we're talking about an adult? And Rav Chisda is assuming we're talking about a daughter who's an adult and she's following her mother. How do we know? Dilma b'katano askinan. Maybe we're talking only about a girl that's a minor, and only a girl that's a minor follows to where her mother goes. And that was because of an incident that happened that we say that the katanim should follow their mothers. The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, misha meis, if you have a situation of someone who dies, v'hiniach ben katan le'imo, and he leaves over a young child, a child who's a minor to his mother, so the inheritors of the father, they say, we'd rather he be by us. It's easier for us to support him if he's by us. But his mother says, I want my son to be by me. He should be raised by me. So we put him by his mother. We don't put him by somebody who is really dividing the inheritance with him, because there could be fights between the inheritance. Because there was even an incident, and they actually killed him. There was a minor child who was with the other Yorshim, and they killed him on Erev Rosh Hashanah, meaning to say they didn't want to split the Yerusha with him. There was an animosity there. Therefore, by minors specifically, they go with their mother. So again, that's what we're saying. Maybe that's only true by minors, but it wouldn't be true by a daughter that's an adult. And the Gemara answers him, Kain lisni l'makom shehi. If that was the case, that we're talking about a girl who was a minor, it should have just said, bring the sustenance to the place where she is. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph.